Okay, so an ecological economist and a neoclassical economist walk into a pub. The neoclassical economist, he walks up to the barkeep and he says, "Barkeep, I will have 1 pint of Guinness, please." So the barkeep goes and he gets his pint glass. He walks up to the pump and he starts filling it up, all brown and frothy and delicious. And he walks up to the bar and he lays down that wonderful beverage and he says, "That'll be $10, please." Hearing this, the neoclassical economist, he turns to his ecological economist colleague. For the sake of argument, let's call him Jeff. And he says, "Jeff, are you hearing this? $10 for a pint of Guinness? $10? I mean, Jesus Christ, that's a ripoff. Man alive." So Jeff turns to him and says, "You know what? I'm willing to bet the true cost of that Guinness is more than $10. So his buddy kind of looks at him. He can tell just from the expression on his friend's face that he wants him to go on. So Jeff goes on and he says, "You see, the first thing you need to take into consideration is the ecological footprint of the barley and the hops and all the other various ingredients that go into that beer. And those have costs associated with them. All that land could be used for other things. And then, of course, they're grown in these nefarious monocultures using pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and God knows what else. And all these terrible chemicals, they all run off the land and into the water, and they seep down in the soil where they stay for generations, and they bioaccumulate within the fat cells of various critters, and all of these yield deleterious effects for the ecosystem for eons to come. Then you need to take into consideration the water that goes into this. Because, I mean, how much water does it take to produce Guinness? It must just boggle the mind to think about it. I mean, every day there would be swimming pools upon swimming pools of water that's going into this. And all this water could have been put to other more productive capacities or other productive processes elsewhere had the allocation been different. However, rather than that, it's being made into beer and it's being shipped halfway across the world so that you can sit here and pound it down your neck while you complain about how expensive it is. I'm willing to say that if you take all this into consideration, the cost exceeds $10 by a vast margin. In fact, I'll go as far as to say the true cost of that beer in your hands, sir, is the viability of the productive capacities of the ecosystem. I would say the true cost of that pint of beer is the blood of your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and countless generations from here to infinity." So, hearing all this, the neoclassical economist, I mean, he's aghast. He's never ever thought of things in these ways, and suddenly it makes so much sense. I mean, all of the things that he's been buying and using his whole life, all these trinkets, they all have hidden costs that aren't reflected in the market values. And, I mean, having worked his whole life as a neoclassical economist, this is a very ego-shattering moment for him. I mean, he is standing there just mouth agape, brain melting and dripping out his ears, And he sits there and he thinks to himself, and then he turns to Jeff and he says, "You know what, Jeff? You're right. You're right. Well, in that case, I'll have a Budweiser. But I'm ching. Ciao for now."